The temperature display read minus 18 degrees Celsius. When Angel finally accepted he was going to die, through the frost forming on his eyelashes, he could barely make out the digital numbers glowing red in the darkness of the industrial freezer. His body had stopped shivering an hour ago, a bad sign, he knew, remembering something about hypothermia from a survival show he'd watched back in Cuba. The phone hidden in the orange crate beside him had 12% battery left. One final message to his mother, typed with fingers so numb they felt like frozen sausages. Mama, I'm in a freezer somewhere in Texas. GPS attached. I love you. I'm sorry. Then his thumb, blue and swollen, hit send. 14 hours earlier, the plan had seemed foolproof. Angel had paid $12,000, his family's entire savings plus loans they'd never repay, to hide in a refrigerated truck carrying mangoes from Mexico to Houston. The cold chain transport meant constant temperature, no stops for inspection, and arrival at a distribution center where sympathetic workers would let him out. He'd done construction in Havana's heat for 10 years. A few hours in a cool truck seemed like paradise by comparison. The loading had happened at dawn in a warehouse outside Nuevo Laredo. Angel watched his workers stack crates of perfect mangoes, their sweet scent mixing with diesel fumes. The truck's refrigeration unit hummed steadily, maintaining the precise temperature needed to keep tropical fruit fresh during transport. Not freezing, just cool, about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the foreman assured him. Uncomfortable but survivable for the 8-hour journey. His hiding spot was ingenious. The smugglers had created a hollow space in the center of the cargo, invisible from any angle. Crates were stacked around him like a fruity fortress, leaving just enough room to sit with his knees drawn up. They'd even provided a small battery-powered heater, water bottles that wouldn't freeze at that temperature, and energy bars. Most importantly, they gave him a cheap smartphone with GPS enabled, so he could guide rescuers to his exact location once the truck reached Houston. Angel had climbed into his mango cave, feeling almost optimistic. After years of watching friends risk the Florida Straits on makeshift rafts, he'd found a safer way. No sharks, no Coast Guard, no sun exposure. Just 8 hours of mild discomfort, then freedom. He'd already lined up construction work through Cuban friends in Houston. This was a smart way to cross, worth every penny of the crushing debt. The first hours passed smoothly. The truck maintained a steady speed. The refrigeration units hummed almost soothing. Angel dozed fitfully, dreaming of Houston apartments and paychecks that could actually support a family. The mangoes around him released their tropical perfume, making confined space smell like the fruit markets of his childhood. He even ate one, careful to hide the pit and peel in his pocket. The border crossing was anticlimactic. Angel felt the truck slow, heard muffled voices, held his breath as he imagined inspection dogs and X-ray machines. But refrigerated produce crossed constantly, and this shipment had all the proper paperwork. Within minutes, they were moving again. He checked his phone. They were in America. The hardest part was over, or so he thought. But somewhere between the border and Houston, plans changed. Angel felt the truck turning off the main highway, taking smaller roads. The journey stretched beyond 8 hours, then 10, then 12. His water was running low, the battery heater dying. Still, he reasoned, delays happened. Traffic, mechanical issues, paperwork problems. The important thing was staying calm, trusting the process. When the truck finally stopped after 13 hours, Angel prepared for release. He heard the rear doors opening, felt cooler air rushing in, but instead of sympathetic workers calling his name, he heard only the efficient sounds of commerce. Forklifts beeping, workers shouting instructions in English, the systematic unloading of cargo. No one was looking for a hidden passenger. No one knew he was there. Through gaps between crates, Angel watched his mango fortress being dismantled, carry away pallet by pallet. He wanted to call out, but couldn't risk it. These weren't the arranged workers. This was somewhere else, some legitimate facility where his discovery would mean arrest and deportation. He pressed himself deeper into the remaining crates, praying they'd leave some behind, give him a chance to escape later. But efficiency was the enemy of stowaways. Every crate was removed, sorted, scanned. Angel found himself pressed into an ever-shrinking space until only one pallet remained his. As the forklift approached, he made a desperate decision. When the driver turned to check his paperwork, Angel rolled out of his hiding spot and behind a stack of crates in the warehouse. For a moment, he thought he'd made it. The warehouse was massive, full of hiding spots. He could wait until shift change, find an exit, disappear into whatever Texas city this was. But as his eyes adjusted to the fluorescent lights, his heart sank. This wasn't a regular warehouse. It was a cold storage facility, and he'd rolled from a refrigerated truck into an even colder world. Workers in insulated suits moved efficiently between sections. Signs indicated different temperature zones: produce, dairy, frozen goods. Angel, in his thin jacket and Cuban blood, was already shivering. He needed to find an exit fast. But the facility was a maze of corridors and storage rooms, each colder than the last. Every turn seemed to lead deeper into the frozen heart of the building. When he heard workers approaching, Angel ducked into the nearest room. The door closed behind him with a soft click that might as well have been a gunshot. He was in a freezer unit, surrounded by pallets of frozen orange juice concentrate. The temperature display by the door showed -18 Celsius, 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Fatal cold. Angel tried the door immediately. Locked from the outside, as all industrial freezers would prevent accidental opening. There was an emergency release somewhere. There had to be. He searched frantically along the walls, his hands already losing feeling. Nothing. Just smooth, insulated panels and stacks of frozen Florida sunshine. The cold attacked immediately. First his extremities, fingers, toes, ears burning with pain. Then the shivering started, violent whole-body convulsions, as his Cuban physiology encountered temperatures it had never imagined. He'd grown up in tropical heat, had never even seen snow. His body had no defense against this Arctic assault. He tried everything, jumping jacks until his lungs burned from the frozen air, wrapping himself in the plastic covering the orange juice pallets, building a shelter from empty crates. But the cold was relentless, seeping through every defense, stealing heat faster than his body could generate it. The mangoes had been kept at 40 degrees. This was 40 degrees below freezing. The difference was death. That's when he remembered the phone. His fingers were already clumsy, barely able to unlock the screen. No signal for calls, but GPS still worked, and somehow, miraculously, he had just enough data to send messages. He texted his cousin in Houston first, then his mother in Cuba, then anyone whose number he could remember. Trapped in freezer. GPS location attached. Please help. Hurry. The responses came quickly. His cousin calling 911, his mother begging for more information, friends offering prayers. But Angel's ability to respond was fading. His fingers wouldn't obey. The touchscreen wouldn't recognize his frozen flesh. He managed to prop the phone in the orange crate, where its small light became his only companion in the growing darkness. He heard forklifts outside, workers passing by. He screamed until his throat was raw, pounded on the door until his hands were bloody. But industrial freezers were soundproof by design. His cries for help were absorbed by insulation, meant to keep cold in and everything else out. Once, he heard someone just outside and pounded frantically. The worker paused, mentioned to a colleague that the freezer was making strange noises, probably compressor or maybe rats. They moved on. As hypothermia set in, Angel's world shrank. The violent shivering stopped, replaced by a deceptive warmth. He knew this was bad, remembered reading about paradoxical undressing, where freezing people felt hot and removed their clothes. He forced himself to stay wrapped in plastic, to keep moving even as his legs felt like concrete. The phone became his lifeline and torture. Messages from his cousin. Emergency services were looking for facility, but there were dozens of cold storage warehouses in the area. From his mother, prayers and love and desperate pleas to hold on. He wanted to respond, to tell them he was trying, but his fingers were purple sausages, useless against the screen. In his delirium, the frozen orange juice became Cuban sunshine. He was back in Havana, selling fruit juice from a cart, his grandmother's recipe. The cold was just a particularly aggressive air conditioner. The frosted pallets were clouds. His father, dead 10 years, stood in the corner, telling him to rest, just rest a little. Angel knew this was his mind protecting him from the truth, that he was dying alone in a freezer, surrounded by frozen sunshine. The rescue, when it came, felt like another hallucination. The door bursting open, men in uniforms rushing in, hands lifting him. He tried to speak, but only croaked. Someone wrapped him in thermal blankets, saying words in English he couldn't understand. The warmth hurt more than the cold had. Pins and needles multiplied by 1,000 as blood returned to frozen tissue. Later, in the hospital, Angel learned he'd been in the freezer for 3 hours. His core temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. He'd lost 2 toes to frostbite, would have nerve damage in his fingers for life. But he'd survived what killed most people in far less time. The doctor called it miraculous, credited his youth and the plastic wrapping that had provided minimal insulation. The legal situation was complex. He'd entered the country illegally, but he'd also nearly died due to what authorities considered human trafficking. The smugglers who'd arranged his transport were part of a larger network, one that usually delivered people successfully, but occasionally lost them to wrong turns and changed plans. Angel's case became evidence in a federal investigation. Immigration authorities were surprisingly sympathetic. His near-death experience, captured in desperate texts and GPS coordinates, made him a victim rather than just a violator. His cousin in Houston, a legal resident, petitioned for humanitarian consideration. The photos of his frostbitten extremities, the hospital records showing how close he'd come to death, built a case for exceptional circumstances. During his recovery, Angel learned what had gone wrong. The truck driver had been spooked by increased Border Patrol activity and diverted to a different facility. The workers who were supposed to extract him were at the Houston distribution center, waiting for mangoes that went to Dallas instead. A simple miscommunication had nearly cost his life. The smuggling network offered no refunds, no apologies. They'd gotten him across the border as promised. That he'd ended up in a freezer instead of freedom was unfortunate, but not their responsibility. His family's $12,000 was gone, the debt remaining like a frozen weight. Angel had paid to be shipped like produce and had almost been stored like it too. Months of legal proceedings followed. Angel testified about the smuggling operation, providing details that helped authorities understand how refrigerated trucks were being used for human transport. His phone, with its desperate messages and GPS trail, became key evidence. He learned he wasn't the first to travel this way, though he was one of the few to survive when things went wrong. The humanitarian visa came through eventually, partly due to media attention his case received. Man survives 3 hours in industrial freezer made headlines, forcing immigration judges to see him as human rather than just another illegal entry. He was allowed to stay, to work, to begin paying off the debt that had nearly killed him. Angel found construction work in Houston, his damaged hands making the labor harder but not impossible. He sent money home when he could, small amounts that barely dented the loan. His mother aged years in the months of his recovery, the image of her son freezing to death haunting her remaining years. His toes, the ones he kept, ached in any temperature below 70 degrees. He couldn't eat mangoes anymore. The smell took him back to that truck, to the false promise of easy passage. Frozen orange juice was impossible. Even seeing it in stores triggered panic attacks. His American dream had been frozen nearly solid, thawed into a reality marked by permanent damage and unpayable debt. The cold storage facility added new security measures after his incident, infrared sensors that could detect human presence in freezers. Angel's ordeal had exposed a weakness in their system, though one they'd never imagined needing to address. Who would voluntarily enter a space where death came in minutes? Only someone desperate enough to hide in a mango truck, to trust strangers with their life. Years passed, but Angel never forgot those 3 hours. The coldest he'd been in Cuba was perhaps 60 degrees on a winter morning. The freezer had been 40 degrees below zero, a temperature that shouldn't exist in a world where people lived. He'd survived it through luck, youth, and a GPS signal that barely penetrated insulated walls. He spoke at immigrant centers sometimes, warning about refrigerated transport. Yes, it avoided desert heat and border patrols, but it also meant trusting your life to temperature controls and timing. One wrong turn, one miscommunication, and you became frozen cargo in someone's supply chain. His frostbitten fingers were visual aids, proof of what happened when the cold chain broke. The phone that saved his life sat in a drawer, battery long dead. Sometimes Angel charged it just to reread those desperate messages, to remember the moment when death felt certain. His mother had kept her side of the conversation, printed out and framed, not as celebration, but as a reminder how close she'd come to losing her only son. The smugglers evolved their methods after Angel's case made news. Better communication systems, backup plans, temperature monitors for human cargo. But the fundamental danger remained. Shipping people like produce men accepting produce-level care. Sometimes fruit arrived perfect. Sometimes it was damaged in transit. Sometimes it ended up in the wrong storage, slowly freezing into profitable loss. Angel became American in the strangest way possible, earning residency through near death, building a life on frostbitten foundations. He worked, paid taxes, slowly chipped away at debt. But part of him remained in that freezer, surrounded by concentrated sunshine he couldn't taste, typing desperate messages with dying fingers, learning that the American dream could be cold enough to kill, and that sometimes the only difference between fresh start and frozen death was a GPS signal and a mother's prayers reaching through insulated walls to save a son who'd paid $12,000 to be shipped like fruit and had nearly been preserved like it too.